Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano checking. Okay, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's just checking to see if the sound is on. And it's time for a review of the new Segall record, Manipulator. Segall, singer-songwriter, producer, multi-instrumentalist, prolific musical phenom. He has well over 20 albums and EPs and splits and collaborative projects under his belt, and I believe his solo career isn't even a decade old at this point. And even though he's not one of these artists that I'm just like on the edge of my seat to hear every new record for him, sometimes he's dropping 2 records in a year's time, he is still one of the most prominent musicians, though, when it comes to modern, underground, psychedelic rock, garage punk. And over the years that he has been releasing music, he has put out quite a few albums that I do enjoy, like Reverse Shark Attack, Slaughterhouse, his self-titled album in 2008, as well as Hair, his collaborative album with White Fence. Now, of course, I'm not doing this review alone. I have invited into this review Joel from the Daily Guru. He is a fellow music critic, music commentator, music fan, and music nerd. We're going to be talking about this record, our favorite tracks, least favorite tracks, what appeals to us, what doesn't. Transition. And here I am with Joel of the Daily Guru, and we are going to talk some shiz about this new Segall record, Manipulator. Joel, as you remember, the last review that we did together, we were pretty much on the same page in a lot of regards. I'm sort of wondering if we're going to butt heads a little bit more on this new record. What were your thoughts on the LP?
I went into it, like I do with all of his records, with a lot of hesitancy because that guy puts out a lot of material, a ton. Every time I turn around, he's putting out another record. And so I go in hesitantly saying, he's gonna make a bad record one of these days. It has to happen.
Really, that's like your fear. You think
it's gonna be the bad record. Yeah, I mean, I literally think he's put out a record a year under his name alone for like the last 6 years or something. And
yeah, sometimes 2 records a year.
Yeah, or 3 because he uses different names. And when I saw that this one had 17 full tracks on it, sometimes
it's almost an hour. Is this his longest solo full length?
Yeah, I was very, very nervous just, before I even played any of it. But I really enjoyed most of it. I was pleasantly surprised that I thought the content really holds up. I felt the first chords in the opening of the first song, I was like, wow, this is really making me think of Sgt. Pepper's. And I know that is a very dangerous album to tap on the shoulder. But the feel of the song, I'm not saying that it was like, that amazing, that was like the first time I heard Sgt. Pepper's. But the feel of the song, the tone of it really kind of had that half psychedelic pushing into glam feel to it.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good opening track. For sure it had like a winning lead guitar melody. I mean, it was definitely a really sticky, sweet melody to start the record off with. To me, Ty has never really been one of my favorite artists, but he's been sort of an interesting artist to just watch his progression and watch his evolution, mostly because you can watch it so closely because of how many albums he puts out. And a lot of his earlier stuff is just so incredibly raw and thrash and bash and just really visceral. And I think this record is definitely one of his most methodically put together. It's not quite as balls to the wall as Slaughterhouse, which to me is a record that really hit me hard upon first listen. I really loved it upon first listen, but maybe because of the lack of finesse of the whole record, it really hasn't stayed with me longer down the road. This record might be a little bit of a grower for a lot of Ty fans, though maybe not quite as much as Sleeper. I mean, even though Ty does have some characteristics that sort of seem to carry on from album to album, it seems to me that he's been making a sincere effort to try to change his ways a little bit on his past few LPs, especially with doing that acoustic album, which honestly I didn't really care for. I mean, I like Ty's production. I think that he pulls together some really authentic sounds from the eras of music that he tries to emulate. But I don't think
just straightforward songwriting is his strongest suit. Most definitely not. And I think even though this record isn't quite as toned down and isn't quite as acoustic as Sleeper, I think he's trying to flex that muscle a little bit more and try to really deliver some coherent songs.
Yeah, the thing that really I kept thinking as I listened to the record was, this is a really accessible record. It's a very easily accessible record. I think he's going to get a lot of people that maybe weren't really into his music. I don't want to say he's going to pull from the mainstream, but he's going to pull more towards the center of rock and indie rock than he was before.
It's going to be underground music fans, but it's going to be less people who are sort of just specifically centered around the whole garage punk thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there was a very clear effort in writing hooks, both lyrically and musically. They are all over the place, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a shift in his style. I think you hit it on the head when you said some of his fans are going to take a while to warm up to this record because it's very user friendly. I was listening to I think it was Feel No was Faker, and to me it felt like it was everything that he's been doing, where it's got that really muddy, sludgy guitar sound, but it's got this really crisp vocal on it, and I don't know. I guess maybe it's like if the Melvins tried to write a hit pop song, I think that's what it would sound like, because you kind of have both working and they're fighting with each other. So
yeah, no, that was a track that stood out to me because of I guess how gentle it was with the rhythm. Like, it didn't seem to go as hard as some of the other tracks here, but still, Ty still threw that incredibly grimy, fuzzy guitar over it. And honestly, I mean, I think it was almost to a detriment, because it kind of killed the vocals and it kind of killed any sort of subtlety going on underneath that. What I enjoyed a lot more was the track right after The Clock, which, if you remember, is a totally acoustic track. Has some bass guitar, has a really quirky groove to it, and a really quirky lead guitar acoustic lead. And I think the song, just because of the lack of that fuzz, has a little bit more room to breathe and just sounds so much more fun and silly. I think what you said earlier about hooks is totally on point for the whole record. I think Ty is really focusing in on hooks on this record. There are consistently so many songs that have hooks that explode really well, contrast the verses very well. The Singer, which has one of the better melodies on the entire LP and has this awesome string section hanging in the background on there, and there's something about just the way that chorus flourishes that kind of reminds me of the Pixies a little bit. Yeah, it's definitely the hooks where I think this album shines the most. That and Ty's mixing. There's some moments where a piano will just come in out of nowhere that sounds gorgeous, or just another string section will come out of nowhere that sounds gorgeous. Again, this is methodically put together for Ty. This is a sort of refined record for him, I think, even though still at the end of the day it's a garage rock record.
Yeah, with what you were saying there, I think it was the song Feel. The bass is really forward in the mix, and they've got it panned. They have the bass panned all the way to the left, and the guitars are sitting in the right channel, and they're completely muted on the other side. So your brain, because most people mix straight down the center. Yeah. I liked it because your brain is a little bit confused in that.
And that's a really old school thing too.
Yeah.
For him to do.
Yeah,
it's really like Blue Cheer kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like he was stuck in 1970, listening to everything that was going on in 1970, took it all together and just said, this is what it would sound like if we combined everything.
There are some moments on this record where I find Ty's guitar wankery to be just a little tiresome. Not that I'm against guitar wankery in general, but like, he could play fast, but he's like not melodically all there. He just kind of stays around a lot of those pentatonics and stuff like that. I think it really kills songs like the second track on the LP.
Yes.
But specifically on Feel, it does have a really awesome, like, acid-soaked excitement to it, but still like that raw, punky edge. There's and there are some riffs and some drum beats as well that sort of like that guitar playing and all those screaming, wailing pentatonics that don't really resonate with me. Sometimes there are drum beats and guitar riffs that don't really vibe with me either, mostly because sometimes Ty just, I think he consistently, on all of his records, even the records that I like, there is sort of the issue of drowning in your influences a little bit. I think there was the song "The Hand." I just sort of like rolled my eyes as soon as that song stepped in because it just sounded like a Steppenwolf song, but like with an acoustic guitar in the background as well. And I was just like, no, I'm just like I'm not in the mood for this. I'm just not into this. But I do have to give it to him for coming up with, I guess different vibes and flavors from the same era he typically runs through. There are a few songs that sound like maybe a little grunge influence, but there's a track toward the back end. Hold on, let me check it right here. The Crawler, which has like this like distinctly Stooges raw power kind of riff and guitar fuzz on it too. That almost every other song evokes a feeling another band or musical era gives me. Sort of, or at least like a subset or a niche in part of 60s or 70s musical culture.
Yeah, I really felt in the first half of the record, I really felt a heavy Aladdin Sane era Bowie going on. I was just like, and it was more than, oh, it sounds glam. I was like, this sounds Bowie glam. And it's both a good and a bad thing. It wasn't a copy, but sometimes I think he might tread a little too close to, showing his cards where he's getting his sound from. But yeah, I think he's definitely pointing and saying, I like this, I like this, I like this, you should be listening to it as well.
Yeah. I think the only two songs on the entire, and we're talking about 17 songs here, I mean, I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like the album was just maybe a little overly long for him. Ty doesn't have a whole lot to pull from in terms of influences or originality, and it just kind of like, I don't know, for me the record got a little monotone. Maybe it'll feel less like that down the way, but there were so few tracks here that kind of threw me for a loop. And I feel like that's really kind of what I need from Ty right now at this point in his career. But that did happen on tracks like The Connection Man, which, if you remember, had that really weird synthesizer in the background just sort of throbbing against the bass and the guitars and the drums. And even though it was like a really stupid, simple thing, it just really flipped his whole style on its head and just, added up to a whole new song.
Yeah, what I think there are one or two tracks that probably could have gone away on this record and not made the final cut. I thought it had a pretty good flow. I found myself kind of doing other things, so to speak, at some points, and then saying, oh, I'm supposed to be listening to this record.
Yeah.
But then when I listened to it a number of times, and I said to myself, I feel like if Jack White was really at his own essence, it would sound more like this record. I think this record, for me, shows how manufactured Jack White's sound is. Because I think there are a ton of similarities in what they're trying to do, and you can almost see the sheen on Jack White's last record when you listen to this one. I love Jack White, but I think it really shows where he's at as a musician.
Oh yeah, this is most definitely pulling from a lot of those same eras, and maybe less blues, but still doing it way more raw.
Yeah.
And then I think the other song that threw me for a loop was just Mr. Maine, which had another good hook, some like really weird falsetto harmonies, but it was sort of the funky drum loop and I think a bass line at the start. No, like sort of I think there was a tambourine in the track that was shaking, and just the funky loop of the drums reminded me of like a Beck track from the 90s. There was just something sort of Beck about how the song started out, but then Ty's vocals come in and it just sort of becomes Ty. Again, I mean, I don't know if you feel this way, but like Ty's vocals are not my favorite. I don't know if it's that he's mixing them very low, or just that he doesn't have the most distinctive voices, or that again, he spends a lot of time emulating, I think, when he's singing. And it sort of becomes like what you were saying earlier. It kind of falls in the background, and I'm just sort of paying attention to other things, or my attention is being drawn elsewhere.
Yeah. His vocals are pretty predictable. He didn't really show me anything new, as people like to say. On this record, his vocals didn't show me anything new. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like the rest of his music had clearly, whether you want to call it evolved or matured, I felt like his vocals stayed in the same place. And, I'd like to see something different from him. I'm not sure what that is, though.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like with how he throws a ton of reverb on his voice and just the way he buries his voice into the distorted guitars, and even with the acoustic guitars here, I just feel like no matter how stripped back a track gets, I don't necessarily get closer to Ty as a singer. You know, I feel like there's always a sort of like sonic distance there, whether it's made by mixing or effects or whatever. You know, even on that acoustic album, I didn't really get that, you know, close, intimate sense that you get from an artist like Bob Dylan when he was doing like The Times They Are Changing. You know, there are close tracks on that record, along with like Nick Drake, you know, Pink Moon or something like that. You know, if Ty really wanted to flex his muscles in that way, I would love to hear a song where like his voice, his inflections, his lyrics are up front for everybody to hear right off the bat. But I'm not sure if he feels comfortable going down that road. I'm not 100% sure why. With all of the influences he very clearly pulls from, I think he might be able to execute it. But I guess there are just some times when, on this record or on his previous records, I would really love to hear him in sort of a more intimate setting.
Yeah, you know, I think maybe he's moving towards that in a way, because if you compare the overall sound of this to Melted or those first few records, it certainly sounds, you know, like you said initially, it's a little less dangerous in a way. It's more produced. It's not as sludgy. So it almost seems like he's moving to a point where that next record is going to be even further into a produced sound, and, you know, maybe some more mixes. You know, I'm so torn on this record because I love when he just lets loose and he's really angry and aggressive with the music, and it's just, you know, the speakers explode. But I also really like the fact that he's writing songs now. He's writing real songs. And, you know, for him and for people who love music, I love the fact that he's going to get more exposure, and hopefully people will dig back into those other records and say, whoa, this is cool.
Yeah, I hope so too. Personally, you know, I'm feeling I'm torn on it in ways as well, just mostly because, not because this album has any overall, like, glaring problem or something that's really detrimental to it. I mean, the things that I'm kind of on the fence with are the things that I'm always on the fence with Ty, even with the records that I like, even with the records that I don't like. But there are some songs on this album that I think are just could have been cut or just don't entertain me for whatever reason. Really, I just sort of wince at them a little bit, maybe because, like, again, to go back to the second track on the LP, "Tall Man, Skinny Lady," that riff. Even with bands coming from that era of music that riff comes from, I hate that riff. So it's really just a matter of personal preference on some of the, you know, 60s, 70s rock singles that he decides to borrow from so obviously. But still, at the end of the day, this record to me is just a little hit or miss, even though it does leave me somewhat excited to hear him just producing his albums in a more refined way and what that could mean for his future stuff.
Yeah, I definitely, you know, I think also for me, it's going to have a lot to do with the environment I'm in when I'm listening to this record. If I'm sitting, you know, in my apartment or I'm out for walking or whatever, I don't know if this is a record I'd go to. If I'm on a road trip, this is definitely a road trip record for me. I think, you know, again, it's got great riffs, it's catchy, and it's got length to it. And yeah, I would want this on a road trip for sure. And, you know, breaking this up in a car, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm feeling like a strong 6 to a light 7 on this thing. How are you?
I was, you know, going into it, I was saying, you know, I'm a strong 7. So.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, we need to find a record that we really disagree on. This is, you know.
We'll get there.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, thank you again, Joel, for coming on here and talking to me about this new Ty record, Manipulator.
You are very welcome, sir. Always glad to be here.
Anthony Fantano, Manipulator, The Daily Guru, The Needle Drop, talking on the internet, forever.